Hi everyone, Siva here. Welcome to another episode of Wandering Minds. I wanted to share with you, following up with the article that I shared with you earlier regarding my curiosity on the aspect of AD and BC in the calendar. To be frank, I was in the impression that AD means after death, but later I found out it is actually something else. Later I'll share with you. I did share briefly in the article called The Ghost in the Calendar what the absence of the year zero tells us about science and soul. And we spoke about the Victor's timeline, the lens of truth, the hard problem of zero, conclusion. And if you want, you can actually watch the video again, which I'll put it over here so that you know what I'm talking about. So in today's episode, as I mentioned earlier in that episode, I'm going to take you behind the scene on what actually gave birth to this article called The Ghost in the Calendar. Now, I was actually pondering, as you know, the wandering mind is interesting, and I invite everyone to have a wandering mind so that we can answer some questions. Now, with the um, introduction of AI, which is already rampant now, we are all so equipped in the world of intellect where information is readily available. By asking the right question, we're able to get some answer. So, my companion in this was. Gemini. So I asked Gemini a couple of questions. So I'm going to take you through the rabbit hole that I took with Gemini. Now again, AI, it gives you the answers, and you need to take AI as a pinch of with a pinch of salt. And whatever information they're getting, I leave it to you to go and find out more and understand more. So these are my questions that I asked about AD and BC. And then it took me to a couple of other questions that I asked, which I'll be sharing with you in a couple of episodes. So the first question that I asked is in calendar, there's AD and BC. Can I know more? And this is what it said. I'm going to just read the article, and it's actually showed over here that you can actually know from here that whatever I'm sharing with you, it's there. So what it said is that it can definitely be a bit confusing at first, especially since the logic for how we count the years actually flips depending on which side of the line you are on. Essentially, our modern calendar, the Gregorian, centers around a single focal point in history. Here's the breakdown. The breakdown goes by BC before Christ. This refers to the era before the estimated birth of Jesus Christ. The logic is time counts backward from 500 BC, goes backward, happened before 200 BC. That's how it is. Think of it like a negative number in a numbering line. Okay, so it goes this way, right? Depends on where you are, and it goes at the back or front. AD stands for Anno Domini, which I thought after that. This is Latin for in the year of our Lord. The logic is time counts forward, now it goes forward. Okay. Earlier was backward, now it's forward. Okay. Time counts forward. We are currently in AD 2026. So remember that. So that part I was okay. The modern shift BCE and CE. Number two. In recent decades, you'll often see BCE and CE used instead of BC and AD. They cover the exact same time frames but use secular, non-religious language. Remember, non-religious, I'll come to it in a while in my other questions that I was asking. BCE stands for Before Common Era, replaces BC. CE, Common Era, replaces AD. Number three, key facts to keep in mind. There's no year zero. This was the one that I was very intrigued about. Okay, the calendar jumps straight from 1 BC to AD 1. This can make calculating a long span of time a little tricky. The maths gap, because the system was created centuries after the events it describes, historians now believe Jesus was actually born around 4 BC to 6 BC. The original calculations were off by just a few years. The origin, the system was devised by a monk named Dionysius Exiguus in AD 525, but it didn't become the global standard for many centuries. Over here, there's a table. These are the comparison at a glance, BC, BCE, and what I just mentioned to you. That's the example that it shows. So some pro tip it gave. If you see a year 400 BC, just remember that the person living then would have to wait 400 years for the AD era to even start. Just imagine it's at the back. Now, the next question that I asked was, what's the time gap between them and what happened in between? Remember, there's a zero that's missing, so I was asking on that. To answer the time gap question, there's actually no time gap at all. There's no gap, remember? Our calendar jumps straight from December 31st, 1 BC to January 1st, AD 1. Because the concept of zero wasn't widely used in Europe when this system was created, the designers simply skipped it. So remember, later I'll be asking questions about Victors and all that stuff. You'll understand about this. And what happened to zero at that time? Let's find out. Here's what was happening during the specific transition. What happened in between? Since 1 BC and AD are back to back, there isn't missing middle period. However, the world was undergoing massive shift during those two specific years. The rise of Roman Empire. This was the peak of Pax Romana, Roman peace. Augustus Caesar was the emperor, and Rome was the undisputed superpower of the Mediterranean. Undisputed superpower. The victors at that time. China's Han Dynasty, on the other hand of the world, the Han Dynasty was facing internal turmoil. In 1 BC, Emperor Ai died, leading to a massive power struggle that eventually saw a commoner named Wang Ngang seize the throne. A commoner came by. The birth of Jesus. Although the calendar was meant to start at the birth, most modern historians believe Jesus was actually born between 6 BC and 4 BC. So at the time AD 1 actually rolled out, the person the calendar is named after was likely that Jesus, already a young child living in Nazareth. So how to calculate the gap between the dates? Because there's no year zero, calculating the time between BC date and AD was slightly different than regular maths. The rule, you add the 2 years together and subtract 1. For example, 50 plus 50 is 100. So 100 minus 1 is 99. If you just did 50 plus 50, you'll be accidentally counting the year zero that doesn't exist. Why don't we just change it? We actually do have a version with zero, but only with specialists. Astronomers use a system where 1 BC is called zero, 2 BC is called year minus 1. This makes their computer model and maths formula work perfectly without having to subtract 1 every time they cross the era line. Next question I asked is that why Jesus was given much preference rather than other religious terminology? It's a great question. Thanks, Gemini, for acknowledging. The short answer is political and colonial power. Remember, it's political and colonial power. Like we're living now, there's political things that's happening. It wasn't because the world sat down and voted on the best system. Rather, it was because the people who used a specific calendar eventually became the most dominant global power. Dominant global power, remember that. Victors. Here's why the year of our Lord AD became the global default. The power of the Roman Church. In the early Middle Ages, the Catholic Churches was the most stable and organized institution in Europe. In the early Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was the most stable and organized institution in Europe. In AD 525, a monk named Dionysius Exiguus invented the AD system because he wanted to calculate the correct date of Easter. Since the church controlled education law record, remember this, controlled education law record and a system spread through Europe. By the time of Charlemagne, around AD 800, it was the standard for all official government documents in West. Second, European colonization. This is the biggest reason the system went global. From 15th to 19th century, European powers like Britain, Spain, and France and Portugal colonized much of the world. They brought their religion, their language, and their calendar. To trade with London or Paris, you had to use the date they used. Eventually, for the sake of global business, shipping, and diplomacy, everyone adopted the Gregorian calendar as the international standard. That's fair because you have to be on the same page. Otherwise, it'll be like chicken and duck talking. It will be difficult to do any transaction. Third, the move to BCE and CE. As the world became more interconnected and diverse, many people felt that using religious figure Jesus to mark the time for the entire planet, including billions of non-Christians, wasn't very inclusive. This is why we now use BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era. The math stays the same. Year 2026 AD is same as 2026 CE. The preference shift. It keeps the standard timeline but removes the religious title, making it neutral tool for science and history. It became inclusive. The following are other preferences still in use. Calendars of Islamic, Jewish, Buddhist, Chinese, it's all here, as you can see. And it all happened based on Islamic on migration, Jewish biblical creation, Buddhist death of Buddha, Chinese historical and astronomical cycle. Now to my next question. Victors. You know, I was telling you about victors, the dominant people who had the control. My question was victors wrote history, so history is eventually flawed if all perspectives are accounted properly. Let's talk about this. You have hit the central challenge of being a historian. There's a famous saying history is a set of lies agreed upon. Let me add one more that's repeated over and over again. Then it becomes the truth. It went on to say, you're absolutely right that history is often written by the winners, but modern historians try to fix this flaw by looking for what they call the silenced voices. Not silence of the lamb, silenced voices. They are a lot. Slowly it's coming out. You can't actually hide the truth. It'll keep coming out sooner or later. Here's how history gets skewed and how we try to unskew it. The victor's bias, number one. When a nation wins a war, they control the printing presses. They eventually portray themselves as the heroes and the enemies as villains or savages. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Savages. Example, for centuries, Mongols' history was written by the people they conquered. Europeans, Persians, Chinese wrote it. Naturally, the Mongols were described only as bloodthirsty monsters. It wasn't until we found the secret history of the Mongols, their own account, that we saw their complex law, religious tolerance, and postal system. Look at that. It's just, I don't know, many truths are hidden, like how the Spanish conquistadors tried to wipe out Mayans. Now it's slowly coming back with ancient aliens and all that stuff talking about it. Number two, the survival of records. Sometimes history isn't biased because people are lying, but because of who could write. In ancient times, only the wealthy or the religious elite were literate. Literacy is very important, right? As a result, we know a lot about what kings and generals thought, but very little about what women, peasants, or enslaved people felt. Their history wasn't erased, it was just never written down. That's sad. Truths. How we fix history today. Number three, to get a 360-degree view, historians act like detective. They don't just read the official victory speech. They look for archaeology, trash heaps and ruins. Don't lie. They tell us what people actually ate and how they lived, regardless of what the king claimed. Archaeological stratigraphy. By looking at layers of soil, we can see when a city was actually burnt or when a new culture arrived, regardless of the written propaganda. And also private letters, a soldier writing home to his mother often tell us a very different story than the general officials report. Now, this is just like how we go into our social media and the algorithm picks up and only gives a skewed view, and we think the world is like that. The world is so colorful. What we see is either black or white. In between, there's a gray. We need to go find out. Is it flawed or just incomplete? That's the question. Instead of seeing history as flawed, it's more helpful to see it as a work in progress WIP. Every time we find a new diary, a sunken ship, or a DNA sample from an ancient burial, we add a new perspective. We are slowly moving from a Venus history to human history. Slowly but surely. But just that we're slower. My next question will be interesting because we'll be going into the realm of science. Because the same thing can happen for history, it can happen for science too. So the next episode we'll be talking about science and the tools that's being used. If you like this and you have some comments, please do so. If you have some other wondering mind things that you think that we should explore, do let me know in the comment and then we see how we can take it from there. Till then, bye bye.